Okay. So promises, we use them a lot in databases, first off. We'll start off with some database promises. You build your client or your pool. You set it up in PG. You acquire PG, you do some stuff, user, password, that kind of thing. And then you build a query. And we did this today in our project. Make a string, select something from a table, in this case, ID name from users. And I just set a limit 5 because I think my database has got lots of users, so I list out 5 of them. And then you go pool.query, because that's the pool we use. There's a few choices. We do recommend using a pool, certainly in web programming. This is more efficient. So pool.query. But this function by itself doesn't do anything. Okay, if I was to have a result, do result equals pool.query, and I'll just log my result. So what am I going to get when I print out the result of this pool.query? Hang on, come on, let's take a look. Let's run this thing. I get a promise. I get a promise. So it looks like the PG query function, pool.query, returns a promise. Great. How does that help me? Because it says it's a pending promise. And of course, what that means is, as we all know from, was it interview number 2? Anybody remember that? Number 2, where we had to trace this code and figure out all the async stuff with the, okay, we got our fs.read file, we got this callback thing happening, and we essentially placed an order for a read file, but the read file didn't happen then. It happened, or notified us later. And that's because of the nature of JavaScript and how, in single-threaded nature, in that JavaScript can never be interrupted. So this is going to start in pool.query. And it might finish fast, it might take a long time, but I'm not gonna be able to find out what happened to it until after all my code is done. As we know, JavaScript cannot be interrupted. So even if something does finish, in between here and here, let's say this query did in fact finish right here on line 12. It was a really fast computer, my query finished. There's no way JavaScript can know about that until it's not busy anymore. And after it executed line 13, it wasn't busy. Now let's add something here. I'm going to put a log to make it really clear. I'm going to say this is the end of my code. End of my code. That's be more cool. It's called end of user thread. I like that. That sound like really cool computer science guys. Now, this is the end. So nothing's going to happen until here. So what my query function is going to do, it's going to immediately return back with a promise. It's going to say, yeah, I'll get to that. Okay, I promise I'll do that. But it's not going to happen right away. Let's run that. And I do. I got back my promise. The PG library essentially placed an order with my computer. Because at the end of the day, it's my computer, right? My this case, Windows or Mac or Linux, that's going to do that query using this PG database engine. So JavaScript with the PG module places an order. It puts in a request. Hey, can you please do this for me? And your computer goes, yeah, sure, no problem. So PG gets back to you and says, yeah, it's been ordered, boss. It'll get done. But it's not going to happen right now, so it returns back a little thing saying, a little token or a promise saying that's in the works. And that's what you get back. You get back this promise. So, of course, that's of no use to you. To read a promise, we have to do what? We all know. How do we read a promise? So how do we get the results out of a promise? A dot then. Yes, we use dot then. So I've got my result. I'm going to call this promise. And I'm going to remember, we talked about renaming variables. I'm not going to do this, am I? Instead, I'm going to either F2 or right click and rename symbol promise. The safe way to rename a symbol in VS Code. Okay. Got this promise. So I have to do promise.then. Dot then. There. I can then that promise. Of course, the then function or promise takes a callback. Can't get around that. So we'll call it result, I suppose. Result, sure. Result. We almost always use the arrow function like that. And then a body. So now I've got a function. And now I can console log. I can log the result of my promise. So I can console log the result, the thing that I got back from PG. What this means is my promise.then, I'm going to get back the result of that query in that result parameter. And remember, since JavaScript can't be interrupted, that's not going to happen until when? Until long after this last line is done. And let's see what happens. See, that actually is the case. There we go. From the very top. So there is my end of user thread. So I got back my promise pending and my last line of my code, and then JavaScript wasn't busy anymore, so it had time to check its messages. I've used this example before in interviews. I tell people, well, it's like you know, let's say you're riding a bicycle or working on something and you have messages coming in, but you're busy. You haven't got time to check your messages. So it's only when you're not busy, then you can check, oh, I got a message. Oh, PG says it's got some stuff for me. Let me get that stuff. That's what this does. So JavaScript will get to its thens, or its event loop, you know, it's all its events, as we know, when it's not busy. And one of the cool things about JavaScript is it blows through this code really, really fast. It doesn't pause at all. There is no delay happening here. It completely blows right through it. Once it gets to here, then it checks. If it has outstanding messages, it'll wait for those. It knows I've got a message. I know what a message is coming. It will not terminate until it knows all of its messages have been received. But once it gets a message, it goes to the then and executes this. Okay, but that happens, of course, after the end of code. Anyway, so I want to impress upon you that the thens don't happen until the end of whatever code it is you're running. In this case, the main thread, or my main bunch of code here. Okay. Okay, my then ran, and I got back this result object. Result is virtually always, well, almost always an object with stuff in it. And I sure did. Look at that. That's my result object. It's pretty big. I got back all kinds of stuff. Wow, look at that. Okay. It's a PG object. I know it's the standard result. The thing we're most interested in is, of course, the thing called rows. And this is unique to PG. The promise result, that's promise. But now, everything inside the result, that is completely dependent on whatever module I was using. In this case, I'm using the PG module. So I know that in a PG promise, I'm going to get result.rows. Let's try that. Result.rows. Because there it is right there. Result.rows. Let's try that. So run this. The code. Run it again. And I get result.rows. That, once again, is unique to PG. If I was using another library, I would get something else. Okay. So there's the .then. And that's how promises work. By the way, it's important to note that the execution of the promise, or the work that gets done, it starts right there. It doesn't start here on the then. It starts as soon as you invoke the API call or function call that was doing the work. In this case, pool.query. That query starts chewing away on it right there. Because remember, JavaScript may be single-threaded, but your computer is certainly not. It can do all kinds of stuff at the same time. So the PG module places an order for that query, and your computer gets it and starts doing it. In the meanwhile, or in the meantime, JavaScript keeps on running. Okay. By the time it gets to here, it may be finished already, it may not, and it gets the message in your .then. All right. So because we know that the work starts here, that means the .then is simply querying or finding out what's the result of that promise, what happened in that promise. So if I was to .then the same promise again, like that, just .then it again, it's not going to execute that query again, is it? It's going to simply say what's the result again, because really my promise now is a fulfilled promise. But looking here, it did in fact print my contents twice, but it only executed the query once. So when you then the same promise, you can then a promise as many times as you want. It doesn't hurt. You can then it forever. Okay, there is no limit on how often you can then the same promise. It just works. Okay, because the content, the result is inside that promise. It's resolved. Okay, so that's using your basic promise pattern. It's an important point to remember that a promise, once it's resolved, you can then it. It's just a resolved promise. Okay, try something else. Let's do something that we did similar in our Light B&B. Instead of having just calling the query this way, we're going to have a function that returns a promise. So why don't we make ourselves a function? Because this is really the common way of running stuff. I'll call it, I don't know, get users. Yeah, get users. I'll just put my stuff in here, just like that. There. Okay, there's my promise, and I can call my get users function. So let's go const result equals my get users function. There. Now I have a function, there's no parameters, so I have a function that is making my SQL call for me. And this is similar to what you've done in your Light B&B project. Okay. And let's just, we'll const log the result for now. Log the result. Okay. Rid of all this stuff. Okay. So what do we think is going to happen here at this point? A function that does a query for us, and we're going to log the result of that function. And of course, we get undefined because the function didn't return anything. So since it returns nothing, and the JavaScript word for nothing there is undefined, that's exactly what we get. We get undefined as the result. So that means I cannot do this. I cannot do a .then on that function because that function is not or does not return a promise. And this is something you will see. Res, and we'll just log the res. There. Okay, let's do this. Right, cannot read property then of undefined because the result is not a promise. That means that our function needs to return a promise. So in order to use this function, now we have this function called get users. To make that function useful to us at all, we can't return undefined. And we can't return, it's not going to return the users for us. So if I return the promise, There. Now my function returns a promise. It doesn't return the users. It returns a promise again. But now my function is a promise function. I can then it. And I love this word. That the term is called venable. Yeah, that's actually a thing, venable. It's a venable object or a venable function, which means you can do a dot then on it. I think when we start getting to React, we do a lot of the stuff, and people are going to say, well, why can't I dot then my function? What's going on? Well, probably because you didn't return the promise. So if you have a function that does promise stuff in it, you need to return that promise. You can't shortcut it. Even if I did a dot then on this, if I did a dot then, result, because I tried this too, honestly, and you can console log the result. You can do that. Sure. But that is still not going to return the results, because that's the return to the callback in your dot then, but not the return for your function itself. So let's see what happens here, by the way. So now I have my function that returns my promise and has a dot then, but I'm doing a then on it first. So I'm doing a then on the promise, and now returning that promise, and my function is doing a then on whatever it gets back. See what I get. And let's result dot rows there. And we'll console log result dot rows, because we know there. Okay. So look what's happening here. So in my first case, I'm console logging result dot rows. But my function is simply, hold on, console log res. There we go. Okay, yeah. There we go. So in this case, I didn't return anything from my promise from here. So when I want to change something or return something from my function that's more specific, in this case, I want to return the res.rows from my promise function. So I don't want get users to return some PG object. What I really want it to do is to return the actual rows. And you've seen this in your LightBAP project. What we do is we actually have your dot then return res or result dot rows, just like that. And then we actually return, instead of returning that, and you can't, we just put a return in front of it. It's easier, it's like that. Yeah. So now I'm returning the results of the then, and I'm returning result.rows. Now, here's a really cool thing about promises. When you then a promise, when you have then on it, if you return something from that then, it becomes available to the next then in the chain. And that's a real important point. Like, it's a critical point to remember. So when you then a promise, you have a dot then on a premise. If that dot then returns something, that dot then becomes the result of the next dot then in the chain, which is why we got undefined here, because we simply console log, didn't we? We console log the res.rows or result.rows, but our then returned nothing. And of course, when a function returns nothing, that means it returns undefined. So when I ran a dot then on this chain, I got undefined. Let's do a more concrete example of that, make it a little more clear what's happening here. So I'm going to go back to my original function, my original example, which is that and that. There we go. So pool.PostgreSQL dot then. Okay. Let's do another dot then on the chain, because the great thing about promises, you don't need to indent the dot then. If I had another promise, I don't have to do a dot then inside here. For example, if I had done this, here, you wouldn't have to do this, right? Because that's the same as callback help. If I have thens within thens within thens, that defeats the whole purpose of having promises. What we oftentimes do is we chain a promise, put a second dot then on it. Exactly the same thing, right? Let's do this there. So you can chain a promise or chain the dot thens. So now we have another dot then. Let's just console log result and see what we get. And we get undefined the second time. That's kind of cool. Why was that? It's because the first dot then didn't return anything. So since we know that the return from a dot then becomes the result of the next then. That's kind of the real secret to promises. I would like write that down on my hand, on maybe a piece of paper. The return from a then is the result or becomes the result of the next then. If I return something, anything from that then, the next then in the chain catches it. Okay, let's try that. Let's return result.rows. Let's return result.rows. Result.rows. There. So now my first then, in fact, let's just put something, let's put a log here. There. Let's call this then one. There. Then one, colon, and we'll call this then two. There. Okay. Let's go result. Okay. Just to make clear what I'm doing. So now I am my first then, print out result.rows, and return from that then result.rows. My second then is going to simply print out whatever it gets. Let's take a look. Like that, my first then, unsurprisingly, I got result.rows. But my second then, I just printed out result. And since I returned result.rows from my first then, that's exactly what I got. We can chain as long as you want. Do a couple of thens. Those semicolons, of course. Okay. And instead of that, let's return, I don't know, let's return 5. Just a number. See what we get. And that's result then 3. And we have then 4. Okay. I should get 5 and undefined, unsurprisingly. So yeah, so when you return anything from a dot then, it ends up in the next then in the chain. And people ask, well, how long does a chain go? It goes forever. There is always a next then. If you want to stop, just stop writing thens. Just don't write anymore. But you can have as many as you want. There's always a further chain because dot then returns a promise. By the way, if you ever get an interview question, I asked this in interviews myself. If somebody ever asks you, what does dot then return? And the answer is, well, it's a thenable object or a promise, essentially. Okay, so it is thenable. All right, so that's chaining promises. Here's something else. Let's actually chain some promises together, like more than one promise. Because this is great for like returning stuff, but it doesn't really do as much good. The real power becomes when you start returning or having promises that run sequentially, like with the the ISS project. Get the IP address, then get the location, then find out the crossing times of the ISS, and they have to happen in order. So let's do another one. Let's do, I think I have another query. I'll do another promise. There, inside my first dot then, I'll put on my rows, but then instead of returning it, I'm going to do another pool dot query with a different sequence string. I'll just say 2 because I don't feel like typing anything else. Okay, I have a pool dot query. I'm going to return that promise. So now my first dot then returns a new promise. Well, I know that whatever gets returned in the dot then is available to the next then in the chain. So that means that result there is going to be the result of that pool dot query, which means it's probably got a dot rows on it, because instead of returning a number or a string or an array, I'm returning the actual new PG promise. And I know the PG promises have result.row in them. Okay. Anyone unclear what I'm doing here? Remember, I've got 2 queries happening here. I've got my first pool.query. My first then grabs the result of that pool.query. I'm going to print it out. But then after that one takes place, I'm going to do a second query in order. Maybe I need the results in the first query, that I can use them in the second query. Here's a trivial example, but works the same way. Let's try that. I don't need my 4 is not needed. I'll leave my 5 there, return 5. Okay, result rows. Okay, now I should get 2 queries that are different in order, and I did. So I got my 2 queries in order, my first 5, my first 2. So you can chain queries. And you notice the dot then is here. I didn't have to do this. I could have, if I weren't to be really painful, done this instead. And have done this, have done that, and this is really painful. There. Yes, you could have done that. Put the dot then inside the dot then, and that'd work. But it's really ugly and painful. It's like kind of hurts your eyes. So this works because it's that same thing, pull dot query dot then, but now I'm nesting my dot thens. And as we know from our interview exercise, that can get really ugly really fast if you have a lot of promises you want to chain. So instead of that, we simply return the promise instead, or return the promise function. There. That means the next then gets it. Okay. All right, enough of chaining and stuff. This is fun. This is the whole key to promises, being able to chain things together with these sequential dot thens. And you can be guaranteed things will happen in that order. This will happen first. Then this won't happen until this one is done. You're guaranteed that. And this will not happen until those 2 are done. Okay. What if something goes wrong in my query? What if I made some kind of mistake? So let's make a mistake in one of my queries. For example, I don't know, make query here. Let's go select ID from, and I'll just mistype the table name. Like I've never made that mistake before. Okay, so now I'm going to run my query, and I get, whoa, I get unhandled promise rejection warning. We all see this. No one goes their life without seeing this warning. Okay, it's like one of those things you see all the time, and I still see them. So it means my promise rejected. I didn't handle it. So with promises, you need to know, of course, the then is how to handle a promise, but you also have to be able to handle a rejection. So promises are all about handling rejection. And how do we handle rejection in a promise? So let's get caller number 2 on the chat line. How do we handle a rejection in a promise? Yes, it's a catch. We use the catch keyword. We have a dot then, and we have a dot catch. And we put it at the end oftentimes, but it can be anywhere. Dot catch. You will almost always have a dot catch, unless you have promise where you absolutely know it can't be rejected. Like return 5. That probably can't be rejected. But return some query, that can probably have a problem with it. Same as that. So a catch. And we oftentimes use the keyword ERR for error. And same thing, it takes a callback. And this, I'm just going to simply log the error. Log const log error. I'm going to say, this is my catch. And I'm going to print the error. Okay. And that's how you handle rejection in a promise. Let's print that. What do we get? Okay. So there's my catch. So it did work. That's my code. But I'm printing out the entire error object, which is a pretty big object. There's all kinds of cool stuff about the severity, the code, the length, all kinds of cool stuff. Okay. There is one we can use. It's called error.message, I believe. Let's try that one. See if that works. Okay, that's kind of useful. So error.message is a useful one that I usually use. Relation users does not exist. And they're exactly right. There is no table called users with 2 S's. So that's a catch. Catch is really cool. Okay. So the catch will catch the problem. Really, when this query ran, it did what's called threw an exception. Okay, we call it throwing an exception, which means somewhere down the chain, some line of code has to catch that exception. So you'll see this terminology quite often in your science: throw and catch. Somebody threw an error, someone's got to catch the error. So when you hear the expression, it threw an error, it's a very common term we use, throwing an error. So because it had users with 2 S's, pull.query threw an error, which means we caught it with our catch. If we didn't, we got unhandled promise rejection. Okay. But wait, there's more. There's a really cool feature of .catch, which is cool and kind of annoying if you don't know what to expect. And this happens way more often than you think in JavaScript, people using promises. They got their stuff, they got their catch. It's like, oh, great, yeah, my stuff works. Okay, fine. Make sure it still works. Yeah, got my stuff. Cool. Okay. But one really interesting feature of .catch is not only does it catch problems in your actual promises that happened, but what if I did this? And I spelled result 2 T's wrong, or I said console ee.log. Now, normally that'd be a horrible, nasty message from JavaScript. What are you doing? You can't do that. What's going on here? All right, let's try that. Okay, I'll just print up error here. But as it turns out, catch catches that for you too. Look at that. Console EE is not defined. It's certainly better than the big dump I get from JavaScript. And my code continued. It didn't crash on me, which is kind of cool. In fact, let's prove that. Let's log some more. Continue. Continuing on. There. Okay, let's try that. Continuing on. So that's kind of cool. I had a really obvious syntax or JavaScript error. This should have crashed my program, shouldn't it? But this catch caught that for me. That's pretty cool. Now, it's nice, but sometimes it can be frustrating because you get this error like, there's an error, what's going on? Because what you oftentimes do is you go error.message. See what you get now. And you get a message, but it doesn't make any sense. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't, like, my query's fine. So you end up focusing on the promise, the actual SQL query, going, well, what's wrong with my query? Maybe it's a long one. It could be like the world's longest, SQL statement. And you're thinking, what the heck's wrong with my statement? You take it, you put it in PSQL, it ran fine there. But what's going on? I'm getting this catch. Well, the problem might not be with your query or with your promise itself. It might be you just made a mistake inside your .then. So this gets me all the time too. So maybe the problem is not with your promise, it's with other stuff inside your .then, because that also threw an error. JavaScript itself threw an error, and since there was a catch down below it, your catch caught that error. So good thing to remember about catches. That can happen a lot. Okay. And by the way, one more interesting thing about catches, I know this is fascinating. If I return something from my catch, I return, error happened there. Well, that is also available to the next then. So if I do a .then, return from a catch, just like from a then, carries on. You can then it again. Now, with a catch or a then, if you return a non-promised thing, just a value, like a string or a number, it is what's called a guaranteed resolved promise. It will never catch. So this is just error happened. So that can't possibly resolve the catch. That's going to be a guaranteed then. Okay. If you return a promise from your then, well, that can either then or not catch, because it can either fail or not. So now I'm returning error.happen, and I'll return my result there. And I've got my error. I don't need an error. Let's just do constantly again. Okay. And there you go. So the return from a catch, just like a then, is available to the next then in the chain. Or if I had an error inside my catch, console EE, what's going to happen here? Anybody? What do you think is going to happen? I just had an error inside my catch. Let's take a look. Now, unhandled promise rejection. Now, why is that? Who wants to take a guess as to why we got that? Why do we get unhandled promise rejection, even though we got a catch here?
I would assume it's because you're not catching the error in the promise that you're passing into the catch.
Well, close. The error fired here, didn't it?
Yeah.
An error was thrown.
Mm-hmm.
Errors trickled downwards. Everything promises trickle down. So there is no catch below here, is there? No catch. So had I had a catch there, like this, now this, apart from that, there. That catch can catch anything above it. So now when I run this, yeah, same thing. Constantly is not defined. Okay. All right. Oh, and that would count as well. So the return from a catch is also available to the next then. Okay, right? That's enough of PG promise. Let's do some fun stuff. Databases are fun, A lot of people love databases, but they're not the common thing we do. In fact, we we never do database queries from our web apps, do we? At least from our things like jQuery, or from later on we're doing React. That's all done on the back end. So this kind of thing, PG, is always something you'll see on the back end, on the server, probably in Node Express. But there are many, many times when we need to make a promise from our front end, from our browser. In fact, that's most what we do, because a lot of us will be doing front-end development. Remember in jQuery, we did an AJAX call, okay? We'll do something very similar. We'll do it from Node right now, because really AJAX is jQuery specific. So we'll do something else. So let's do something else. We're going to do, instead of this, I'm going to use a different library. Instead of PG, use a library called Axios. And you'll become best friends with Axios, I promise you, very soon. And probably the rest of your careers, unless something else better comes along, when it's pretty good. Although people who have tried, Axios is still one of the best ones. Okay, we have this library called Axios. Now, I think I'll need to require it or include it. Let's take a look, and oh, good. I must have Axios installed. Okay. Axios is like AJAX is a jQuery, but we don't have jQuery. Going forward, we'll be doing things like React or just normal JavaScript sometimes. And there is no AJAX. There's no .ajax or $.get or $.post. But Axios is a module we can use both in front and back end that does the very same thing. Let's make a query. So the way Axios works, you can do a .get or a .put. So you would go Axios let's do a get. Just like that. That's how Axios works. Axios, much like $.get in jQuery. And then you give you Axios.get a URL. I'm going to make a variable just for fun. Const URL equals, and I'll go HTTPS, I'm going to use one I used before, // API dot Kanye dot rest. There we go. So there's some imaginary API that we could use, okay? API.kanye.rest. So I want to call that API with a get. Let's try that. So let's put my URL in there and call it. See if it works. Okay. Well, something happened, but I didn't see anything because I didn't then my promise, because Axios.get, much like PG query, returns a promise. So I have to then it, because this is, what's the word? It's thenable. It's a thenable object. So I have to go then, don't I? Then. Cool. Whoops. Then. Okay. And we'll take the result. I'll say res. Sure. Result. And I'm going to print out my result object. Let's log that result. There we go. Okay. Let's try that. So now I'm printing out the results I got back from Kanye.rest. Let's give it a try. Okay. And then is out defined .then. There we go. Okay. Wow, look at that. That's a huge object. Don't try this at home. I would recommend you don't print out the res or the res from a Axios object. It's huge. It just goes on and on and on. It's like, wow, lots of stuff. Okay, it's really big. So yeah, you only do it once. But yeah, it's useful stuff for like network guys, but wow, that's a lot of crap. And we don't care about that stuff. Really, we're there for the host, allow half open sockets, yes, kind of cool stuff if you like, network stuff, but we don't really care about that for development. when you're using Axios, it's not dot rows, because that was PG. It's going to be dot data. Much like PG was res.rows, well, now it's res.data. Because I'm using a different library, it's now Axios. So I'm going to get res.data. Let's try that. See what I get back from this. Kanye. There we go. Okay. Word for a second. Kanye.rest. Let's try it again. Ah, there we go. Look at that. And I got back some data from Kanye.rest. People say it's not enough that I got my point across. The point is across until we cross the point. Wow. Wow. Isn't that great? Like, that's awesome. I don't know what it means, but it's pretty awesome. So we get some really cool words of wisdom from Kanye.rest. It's really cool. Let's run it again. These are cool. Okay. One day I'm going to marry a porn star. Yeah, you go. Wow. Look at these great words of wisdom. So I'm using an API, Kanye.rest, and that's how you use APIs. APIs are just simply HTTP or HTTPS endpoints, URLs, if you will. There's somebody who wrote an Express or something server, and there's millions of them out there, tons of them. That's one of them. And later on in React Week, I'll do another one with you for doing some other cool stuff. We'll do Kanye as well, but the other stuff as well. So there's lots of these. And that's how we use them, using Axios. Again, this is actually stuff put as well, or post, but get used for getting stuff. So there's a promise. We use our dot then. One more, I can't get enough of this. One more time. Wow. Look at that. Just can't get enough. Wow. Okay. So that's cool. Same thing with a dot then. Of course, if we mess up, we have an error in the API. It doesn't exist. As it turns out, KYNE does exist. Huh, go figure. But I'll say Kanye X hopefully doesn't exist. Let's see what we get. Make a mistake, and we get unhandled promise rejection. Of course, because we didn't handle our promise rejection. And there is no Kanye X dot reps. We have to do a dot catch. Easy enough. We can add a catch with a dot error, and we will log our error dot message again. Message is a pretty safe one. A lot of them have message, so it's great. Okay, let's try it again. And not found. API.kanyex.rest. Yes, I made a mistake. Easy one. I can fix my Kanye.rest. Cool. Oops. Okay. Wow. Truth is my goal and controversy is my gym. I'll do 100 reps of controversy for a 6-pack of truth. Love it. Okay. So now we got one Kanye, but one Kanye is not enough, is it? I mean, come on. I mean, this is great stuff. We should chain our Kanyes, do a couple of Kanyes. Let's just chain a few Kanyes, shall we? So instead of that, will console log our first one, but then we're going to do another Axios.get inside there, right? We can do that, right? Now, of course, what I need to do is I need to return that promise. So the next then, let's just copy our thens. Yeah. Now I have a bunch of thens. And I need to return that first promise. There. So I'm returning the promise, which means the next then is going to get an Axios.get from Kanye again. So I return that one. Okay. Which means the next then is going to get it. So I'll return this one, which means the next then. I haven't got a next then. Okay, I'll stop there. And let's just put our text here again. And one. There. Let's copy it. There, there. Then 1, then 2, and then 2. I'm gonna call it Kanye 1. Yeah. Kanye 1. There. Oops. And we'll just say this catch. Cool. Sure. Okay. We should get 3 Kanyes for the price of 1. And we did. Style is genderless. I really love my Tesla. I'm in the future. Thank you, Elon. Yeah, thank you, Elon. Yes. Okay. I should be more like water today. Yeah. What does that mean? Wow. Oops. Okay. Oh, look at number 3. Can we all feel for that? My greatest pain in life is that I will never be able to see myself perform live. Oh, the poor man. That's horrible. One cool thing though, you notice that Kanye is returning me an object, isn't he? Look at that. That's kind of cool. And it's an object with a value with a key of quote in it. So what I can do here, that's kind of cool. Since I know that, I can go console log res.data dot quote. Cool. I can add all those. The question is it possible to know which then the catch came from? Not really. Not easily. You can craft your, build your object stuff. So no, not so easily. The catch just happened. Threw up in the air. Oh, wait, it's there. I got it. The catch got it. Where'd it come from? I don't know. It landed in my lap. So, however, you could certainly add some information, and I will talk about how to throw your own error in a minute here. Great segue for it later. So yes. Okay. So now I'm going to actually get the Kanye quote itself. A little cleaner. Look at that. Much better. Look at that. 3 Kanyes. Okay. More Kanye. I know we can't get enough of him. Okay. So let's look at this. Let's look at our object, our res object. That's kind of cool. That res, that's promise. You always get a result. You can call it anything you want. R, it doesn't matter. But that first parameter you get, that's the promise. Okay. The second parameter you get, or the second thing, what's inside the dot res dot, that came from whatever module you were using. In this case, I'm using Axios. And I know because I've read Axios manual that I'm going to get res.data. So I know that res is a huge object which has .data in it. So that comes from Axios. But that .quote, who's that come from? What's that come from? The quote. That doesn't come from Axios. It's not promise. It comes to Kanye. He's sending me .quote inside his object that he's sending back. Okay. So res promise .data Axios .quote from Kanye. Okay. All right. I hate it when I'm on a flight and I wake up with a water bottle next to me and I'm like, oh, great. Now I got to be responsible for this water bottle. That's happened to me. That has. It's like, wow. Okay. For Kanye 3, do we have to return x.get? Don't have to if we return another one. There's no then. So we're returning, in fact, if I dot then here. Good question, though. if I had a dot then, let's actually take the dot then, let's copy it. Do dot then. Let's catch. What is that dot then going to catch? Or not catch, bad term. What's that dot then going to get as its result? Anybody? Now, knowing the rules of dot thens and catches, what do we know about this? What do we know about dot then that this dot then is going to get? It's going to get what? Remember, the return from a then or a catch is what ends up in the next then. So what does that dot then return? Nothing. Yeah, undefined, nothing. So that is what I should get in Kanye 4. I should get nothing. And of course, well, I tried to reference it, but yeah, look what happened though. That's kind of cool. Didn't crash on me. My catch caught that error. That's kind of cool. It caught my error saying, wait a second, res is undefined. You can't do res.data.quote on undefined. Normally that would be a really nasty JavaScript, crashing kind of error, wouldn't it? But my catch caught it. Kind of cool, right? So one more keyword we're going to talk about, by the way. We have dot then and we have dot catch. There's one more very important one. It's important in databases. It's pretty important for some stuff, but it's a really useful one. Anyone know what the third member of the promise family is? We have dot then, we have dot catch. What's that third one that we use? Kind of little brother. It's kind of like nothing. What's like a younger brother? Finally, yes, it's finally. There is a dot finally. Oops, finally. It takes no parameters, or sorry, it takes a function with no parameters. Come on. There. Okay, and now I can do with it, just finally. So we'll just print out finally. And the dot finally will run all the time. Regardless, then or catch, doesn't matter. It will always run. It's useful for things like cleanup. You want to, like in database stuff, if you have a database process running and then you want to finish, you want to clean up your database. We have to close connections sometimes or do some cleanup. Finally is very useful for that. It's for something you want to have happen all the time. Let's put a string in there. Now let's run our dot finally, and we should get a dot finally. Look at that. Let's get rid of our error. Let's just not have that extra one in there. There. Okay. And we should still get a finally. And we do. So a finally runs regardless of then or catch. Doesn't matter. Okay. Very, very useful. Not as commonly used because sometimes we don't care. But if you have something you just want to always happen, it doesn't matter. It has to happen. Put it in a dot finally. And there are times that will happen quite a bit. You'll see it when you do some, free some memory up or do some stuff. It's finally is useful. All right. So let's talk about promise.all. Has anybody heard of promise.all? It's the other brother, kind of the stepbrother of the promise world. We have dot then, dot catch. Well, we have dot all. Promise.all, but this is what's called a static function or a template function or prototype function in JavaScript. It looks like this: promise, capital P promise, much like we have, well, it's the same thing, promise.all. There's an all function. This one is useful if you want to run a bunch of things all at once. So I want to run bunch of Kanyes all at once. I don't want to wait. Like that was painful waiting that extra millisecond for the second Kanye. I mean, you can't wait for the next one, can we? So let's try that. I want to run 3 or 4 Kanyes all at once. So promise.all takes as a parameter an array of promises. So we got to give it an array. And let's make a promise here just for fun. Const promise, come on, promise 1, 1, 2, and 3. Make 3 promises. There. I have 3 promises, and promise that all takes an array of promises like that. 2, oops, comma, it's an array, and promise number 3. There. And then, no pun intended, then it is a then. So that part is the same. Then, and it has a res. So far it looks like a promise, but it's a bit different. Let's just move our stuff out of here. I'm going to keep my catch, by the way, right here, because that is still useful. It's messing up. There we go. Okay. So same thing, dot then, but now the res in a dot then in a promise dot all is a bit different because I've got 3 promises. Well, 1 res is not enough, is it? In fact, I'm going to get 3 reses back, okay, from this. So really, you get back an array of res. So oftentimes you'll see people call it this. They'll call it all. It's an array to indicate I'm getting back an array from my promise.all. And then I got an array of 3. Let's actually log all.length. And we should get back a number if it's an array. We'll take a look. 3. So yes, all is in fact an array. And it's an array of res, which means I could do it the long way. Res1 equals all 0. And res2 and 3. I wouldn't normally do this, but just for illustration. Res all 1, all 2, and all 0. There, I've got 3 reses. Each one of those has a dot data on it, doesn't it? So I console log my log. Or I can do a for loop. That's kind of cool. That'll work. Let's do that. Let's do a for loop. Since we know we have an array of reses, the best practice, but we'll try that. So for res of all, yeah. Look at that. We're going to log our res. Now it's the same. Dot data, because it's axis, dot quote. Cool. Okay. Let's give it a try. And we do. So, but now they ran, we can tell, noticeably faster, right? There's a huge difference in speed when it happened all at once. Anybody notice? So, right. Okay. Look at that. I just can't get enough. Like all day I'll watch this. Like, wow. Wow. Okay. Anyway, so that's promise.all. One of the problems with promise.all is that if one of the promises fail, they all fail. And you have no idea which one failed, right? So for example, if I had these instead like that, okay, so now I've got 3 gets, and they're different. We'll assume they're different. But let's say one of them failed. Let's say I did have, the middle one had Kanye X in it, okay? What's going to happen is, I'm just going to get that error. The catch is going to catch the error, and none of my thens will happen. I will have no idea what happened or which promise failed me. I don't know. I can't though, right? There are ways you can get around that. One of the common ways we used to do it is to do it this way. And this is kind of interesting. Let's try this. We did it this. We would do a catch here. Did that. There. Okay. So now what we're doing is we're adding a catch. What am I doing there? Like, what's happening here? Anyone know? What have I done here? It's an interesting trick. But what am I actually doing here? Notice I've got this catch E, arrow E. What it means is I'm doing a pre-catch on all these promises. And if I do a catch, I'm going to immediately return the same error. Or you got a message maybe. Sure, do that. Or I can even return an object with quote there. Because I'm reading quote here. That's kind of cool. Let's try that. Let's copy these instead. Now, this is a totally made up example. Okay, this is not the way we do it. Just demonstrate how this works. So now, I'm now returning an object all the time. That means the return from a catch is always a then, isn't it? Right? So each one of these reses is going to be a guaranteed promise now. See what happens. And look at that. Okay. My first one still ran. My second one failed on me, which means things failed. My third one couldn't run because it died before that. So, but my catch caught my error, didn't it? Which is kind of cool. Oh, that's actually my data. So hold on. Res.data. Ah, res.quote. Ah, hold on. This is getting complicated. I have to go data. Ah, don't do that. Do the easy way. That's too complicated. There, we go console log. Go all 0 dot data dot quote there. That all 2, but we know there we go. I know that the first one or number 1 has an error in it. There. This is why this was hard, okay? And I'll explain why we don't do this anymore. But we had to do it to get around the limitations of that. So, and we go. Missing 1. There we go. Okay. (2024). Very undefined. Data of undefined. Anyway. This will catch your errors for you. There is a new version of promise.all. We don't use it in our project coming up in 2 weeks, React. It's called All Settled. It is a much more modern way to do promise.all. Because in promise.all, really, you just have to hope that they're all going to resolve for you. And normally they do. Or you have a situation where you don't care. You use promise.all, you really only care if, oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, Cognac not found. Wow, my catch caught it. Thank God for catches. There we go. We only use promise.all really if we don't care, right? We really don't care if one of them fails, because the 3 things happen all at once. If they all fail, there's no point in getting any of them. So it's very appropriate to use in a lot of cases. We'll use this in one of our cases where we load 3 things all at once. And if something's going wrong, we don't care. The whole thing failed. It's really an all or none kind of thing in promise.all. Well, the question is, if we have a pre-catch, do we still the promise that there's a catch? That's a good point. We don't, because it's pre-caught. However, if I had an error here, like I had before, that catch catches that one. But you're absolutely correct. Since it was pre-caught, that particular promise can't possibly throw again. It's been caught. So it will never throw another error if it's been caught. That's kind of our review of promises. They're really cool. There's a lot of cool things about them. But remember the fact that we have a then, catch, and finally, and the returning from a then or a catch gives you a value or a res available in the next then or chain. So, all right, I'll let everyone go. So I will tell again, have fun with promises.